The fluorescent lights above hummed their tired song, the same melody they'd been singing for the past 3 years. Sarah Chun sat at her cubicle desk, staring at the overdue notice on her phone screen while pretending to review a spreadsheet. Rent was due in 4 days. Her bank account had $217 in it. The notice wasn't threatening yet, but it would be soon. It always followed the same pattern. Polite reminder, firm reminder, final notice. Then the conversation with her landlord that made her stomach twist into knots. She set the phone face down and pressed her fingertips against her temples. The headache had started around 2 in the afternoon, right after she'd skipped lunch again. There was a protein bar in her desk drawer, the cheap kind that tasted like cardboard held together with chemical sweetness. She'd eat it at 4 o'clock, maybe 4:30 if she could wait that long. Dinner would be instant ramen, the same as yesterday, the same as the day before that. Around her, the office carried on with its usual rhythm. Keyboards clicking, phones ringing. Linda from accounting laughing too loudly at something on her screen. The coffee machine in the break room grinding out its 1,000th cup of the day. Sarah had been promoted to Senior Administrative Coordinator 8 months ago. The title sounded impressive. The raise had been 3%. After taxes, it meant an extra $47 per paycheck. Not enough to matter. Not enough to change anything. Sarah, you got a minute? She looked up. Marcus from IT stood at the edge of her cubicle, holding a tablet and wearing that apologetic expression he always had when he needed something. Marcus was nice enough. Quiet. A little awkward. He'd asked her out twice in the past year. Both times she'd said no as gently as she could manage. Both times he'd accepted it with wounded dignity and hadn't brought it up again. But something had shifted recently. She'd catch him watching her sometimes, his expression caught between hope and something that made her uncomfortable. Sure, she said, minimizing the overdue notice on her phone. What do you need? Just a signature on this equipment checkout form. You're listed as department head for administrative staff now. So he trailed off, offering her the tablet. She took it and scanned the form without really reading it. Yeah, no problem. As she signed with her fingertip, Marcus shifted his weight from foot to foot. She could feel him working up to something. The air between them became thick with unspoken intention. So, he cleared his throat. There's this new Thai place that opened up on 7th Street. I was thinking maybe I have a boyfriend. The words came out too quickly, sharp and defensive. Sarah felt her face flush even as she said them. Marcus blinked, clearly surprised. She'd never mentioned a boyfriend before, because there wasn't one. There hadn't been anyone in almost 2 years. Dating required time and money and emotional energy she simply didn't have. But the lie was out now, hanging in the recycled office air between them. Oh, Marcus said. I didn't know. That's great. Good for you. Yeah. Sarah handed back the tablet, not meeting his eyes. It's pretty new. Cool. Well, I'll let you get back to work. He retreated, and Sarah exhaled slowly, feeling the tension drain from her shoulders. She immediately felt guilty. Marcus didn't deserve that kind of dismissal, but she was so tired. Tired of managing other people's feelings. Tired of having to be polite about things she didn't have the bandwidth to handle. The lie had been easier than another gentle rejection. Another conversation about why now wasn't a good time for her. She glanced at her phone again. 3:57. Close enough. She pulled out the protein bar. The afternoon crawled forward. At 5:30, she packed up her things and headed for the elevator. The building was one of those generic downtown high-rises, all glass and steel and expensive emptiness. The company she worked for, DataSync Solutions, occupied floors 8 through 12. She'd never been above the 14th floor. She'd heard the top floors were some kind of venture capital firm. The kind of people who worked up there didn't take the same elevators as people like her. The lobby was busy with end-of-day traffic. Sarah pushed through the revolving door and stepped out into the October evening. The air had that first real bite of autumn in it. She pulled her cardigan tighter and started the 6-block walk to the bus stop. Her phone buzzed. A text from her mother. Asterisk, call me when you can. Nothing urgent, asterisk. Sarah knew what that meant. It meant her mother needed money again. It meant her brother had probably gotten into some new financial mess and her mother was trying to bail him out. It meant another conversation about family responsibility and how Sarah was the responsible one, the one who always figured things out. She'd call tomorrow, maybe the day after. The bus was late. Sarah stood at the stop, watching the traffic flow by, and felt the peculiar loneliness that came from being surrounded by people who didn't see you. She was 28 years old. She had a college degree she was still paying for. She worked 50 hours a week and barely made rent. She was invisible in all the ways that mattered. When the bus finally came, she found a seat near the back and leaned her head against the window. 45 minutes to her neighborhood. Then the walk to her apartment. Then the ramen and the email she needed to send and the laundry she'd been putting off. Then sleep, if the neighbors were quiet. Then tomorrow, which would be exactly like today. The woman sitting next to her was playing a mobile game with the sound on, cheerful music and digital chimes. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to make herself smaller. Alexander Moretti stood in his office on the 42nd floor and looked down at the city below. From this height, everything became abstract. Tiny cars, tiny people, tiny lives moving in their tiny patterns. He'd been in a meeting for the past 3 hours. Venture capital discussions always took too long. People who wanted money felt the need to perform, to oversee, to justify. He preferred efficiency. State the numbers. Present the projections. Yes or no? The meeting had ended 20 minutes ago. Everyone else had left. Alexander remained at the window, loosening his tie slightly and allowing himself this small moment of stillness before the next obligation. His phone buzzed. His assistant, Jeremy, with the evening summary. 3 urgent items that weren't actually urgent. 2 dinner invitations he would decline. 1 interview request from Forbes he would ignore. The same as every evening. He was 34 years old. He had more money than he could spend in 3 lifetimes. He ran a venture capital firm that had helped launch 17 successful companies in the past 5 years. His photograph appeared in business magazines with words like ruthless and visionary in the headlines. People treated him with a careful blend of respect and fear. He preferred it that way. Fear was honest. Fear didn't waste time. The office was silent now. Alexander appreciated silence. It allowed for thought without interruption. His mind was already moving to the next day's priorities when he heard the voices. They came from the elevator lobby, drifting through the partially open door of his office. 2 women, speaking in the casual way people did when they thought no one was listening. Did you hear about Sarah? The one who works on 9. The quiet one? Administrative. Here, apparently she told Marcus from IT she has a boyfriend. So everyone knows she doesn't. She's been single forever. I think she just said it to get him to stop asking her out. That's kind of sad. Which part? That she had to lie, or that it worked? They both laughed. The sound faded as they moved toward the elevator. Alexander stood very still, his attention caught by something he couldn't immediately name. A woman who had to invent a boyfriend to be left alone. He found himself bothered by this information in a way that didn't make logical sense. He didn't know this woman. He'd never met anyone from the lower floors. Their worlds didn't intersect, but the image lingered. Someone so worn down by unwanted attention that lying became easier than existing. Alexander walked back to his desk and opened his laptop. It took him less than 5 minutes to find Sarah Chun in the building directory. Employee ID photo. Young, professional, carefully neutral expression. The kind of face that had learned to reveal nothing. Administrative coordinator. 3 years with the company. Bachelor's degree in communications. No disciplinary records. No outstanding achievements. The type of employee who did her work quietly and expected nothing in return. He stared at the photo longer than necessary. Then he closed the laptop and stood up. This was none of his business. He had actual priorities to attend to. Real problems that required solutions. But as he took the private elevator down to the parking garage, where his driver waited with the town car, Alexander found himself thinking about a woman who'd had to lie about having a boyfriend. And for reasons he didn't fully understand yet, he decided this was something he could fix. Sarah's landlord called on Thursday morning. She was at her desk, trying to focus on a purchase order form, when her phone vibrated with a familiar number. Her stomach dropped. She'd managed to avoid him for almost a week, but avoidance only worked for so long. She let it go to voicemail. 2 minutes later, her email chimed. Subject line, rent notice. Immediate attention required. Sarah opened it with shaking hands. The message was polite but firm. Rent was now officially late. Late fees would be applied. If payment wasn't received by end of business tomorrow, they would need to discuss next steps. The phrase made her skin crawl. Next steps meant eviction proceedings. Next steps meant everything falling apart. She had $432 in her checking account. Rent was $1,200. Even with the paycheck coming tomorrow, she'd be short. She'd done the math 17 times already. There was no solution that didn't involve asking someone for money, and there was no one to ask. Her mother was already broke. Her brother was worse than broke. She had friends theoretically, but none close enough to ask for hundreds of dollars. She'd looked into payday loans and felt sick at the interest rates. She considered selling her laptop, her only valuable possession, but she needed it for work. The walls of her cubicle felt like they were closing in. Sarah? She jumped. Linda, from accounting, stood there, holding a manila envelope. Sorry, didn't mean to startle you. Linda smiled, the kind of smile that meant she was about to ask for something. You're good with words, right? I guess. Could you proofread this memo before I send it to the department heads? I'm terrible at this formal writing stuff. Sarah took the envelope, grateful for the distraction. Sure, no problem. You're a lifesaver. Oh, and hey. Linda leaned against the cubicle wall, dropping her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. I heard you have a boyfriend now. That's so great. What's he like? Sarah's mind went blank. The lie she'd told Marcus had apparently spread. Of course it had. Office gossip moved faster than actual work. He's nice, she managed. That's it? Just nice? Linda laughed. Come on, give me something. What does he do? How'd you meet? Sarah felt heat rising in her face. She should have prepared for this. Should have built a proper backstory for her imaginary boyfriend. But she'd been too busy panicking about rent to think about maintaining a fictional relationship. He works in finance, she said slowly. We met through a friend. It's still pretty new, so I don't really want to jinx it by talking about it too much. It was a terrible lie, vague and unconvincing. But Linda seemed satisfied. I get it. Well, I'm happy for you. You deserve something good. She pushed off from the wall. Let me know when you're done with that memo. After Linda left, Sarah sat very still, staring at the manila envelope without seeing it. She just made the lie bigger, more complicated. Sooner or later, someone would ask to meet this fictional boyfriend. Sooner or later, the whole thing would collapse. But that was a problem for future Sarah. Present Sarah had to figure out how to pay rent. She opened her laptop and pulled up her bank account again, as if the numbers might have magically changed. They hadn't. She refreshed the page anyway. Still the same. Her email chimed again. She expected another message from her landlord, but the sender name made her pause. Tenant Services, Columbia Heights Apartments. She opened it. Dear Ms. Chin, *, we are pleased to inform you that you have been selected for our emergency assistance program. Due to your excellent rental history and current financial hardship, your rent payment for this month has been adjusted to $400. This is a one-time assistance benefit designed to help valued tenants during unexpected difficulties. *, please confirm receipt of this email. Your adjusted rent total is due by end of business tomorrow. *. Sincerely, Columbia Heights Management. Sarah read the email 3 times. Then she read it again. Emergency assistance program? She'd never heard of such a thing. She'd lived in that building for 2 years, and no one had ever mentioned any kind of assistance. Her hands were shaking as she typed a response, asking for clarification. The reply came within minutes. The program was new, implemented this quarter, and she'd been automatically enrolled based on her payment history and current account status. $400. She could pay $400. She'd be broke until next paycheck, but she could make it work. She'd have to skip groceries for a week, but she could make it work. Relief flooded through her, so intensely it felt like pain. She put her head down on her desk and just breathed for a moment, feeling the tight knot in her chest finally loosen. She didn't question it. She didn't wonder how they'd known about her financial hardship. She was too grateful to question anything. By the end of the day, she transferred the $400 and received confirmation that her account was current. Walking to the bus stop that evening, Sarah felt lighter than she had in weeks. The October air was cold, but she didn't mind. She'd made it through another crisis. She was still standing. On the 42nd floor, Alexander closed his laptop and checked the time. The transaction had gone through. The property management company had been surprisingly cooperative once he'd made it clear this was a priority. They'd asked no questions about his interest in one particular tenant's financial situation. Money simplified things. He leaned back in his chair, considering what he'd just done. It was impulsive, unusual. He didn't typically involve himself in individual hardship cases. But something about Sarah Chen's situation had bothered him. The image of someone who had to lie about having a boyfriend, who struggled to pay rent while working full-time, who moved through the world invisible and exhausted. He could fix that. Small adjustments, careful interventions. Nothing dramatic enough to raise suspicion. Jeremy knocked on his office door. "Your dinner reservation is in 30 minutes. Cancel it," Alexander said. "Sir?" "Cancel the reservation. I'm working late tonight." Jeremy hesitated, then nodded and left. Alexander pulled up Sarah's employee file again. He studied the photo, trying to understand what had compelled him to act. She was attractive, but that wasn't it. He'd met countless attractive women. This was something else. Something about the careful blankness of her expression. The sense that she'd learned to expect nothing. He could change that, quietly, from a distance. It became a small project, something to occupy the parts of his mind that weren't engaged with actual work. 2 weeks later, Sarah received an email from HR. "Dear Ms. Chen, congratulations. You have been selected to participate in our new professional development grant program. Based on your tenure and performance, you are eligible for a one-time education grant of $2,500 to be used toward professional certifications, continuing education, or student loan payments. Asterisk. Please see attached form for distribution options." Sarah stared at her screen, certain she'd misread something. $2,500? She clicked through the attached documents, scanning for the catch. There had to be requirements, obligations, repayment terms. But there was nothing, just a straightforward grant. She could direct it to her student loans or take it as taxable income. No strings attached. She got up from her desk and walked to the bathroom, locked herself in a stall, and cried silently for 5 minutes. When she'd cried herself empty, she washed her face and went back to work. That evening, she directed the full amount to her highest interest student loan. The balance dropped from $19,000 to $16,500. It was still overwhelming, but it was less overwhelming. For the first time in years, she felt like she was moving forward instead of just drowning in place. Things kept happening. Her bus pass, which should have expired, mysteriously renewed itself. When she called the transit authority to confirm the charge, they told her she'd been automatically enrolled in a low-income discount program. Her monthly pass now cost $15 instead of $75. A week later, her health insurance through work upgraded. Better coverage, lower copays. HR said it was a company-wide improvement. But when Sarah mentioned it to Linda looked confused and said her insurance hadn't changed. Sarah started keeping a list in her phone. Rent assistance, education grant, bus pass, insurance upgrade. Each item felt impossible individually. Together, they felt like something else. Like someone was watching. Like someone was helping. But that was paranoid. Nobody was paying attention to her. She was just getting lucky for once. Life was finally cutting her some slack. She almost believed it. The first time Sarah saw Alexander Moretti in person, she was carrying too many things and wasn't watching where she was going. It was a Thursday afternoon. She'd been sent to the main floor lobby to pick up a delivery for her department. 3 large boxes of promotional materials that were supposed to have been delivered directly to the 9th floor, but had somehow ended up at the front desk instead. She'd made 2 trips already and was coming back for the 3rd box, her arms full of folders she'd grabbed from her desk because she was trying to do 17 things at once. She backed through the elevator doors, struggling with the folders, and immediately collided with someone. The folders went flying. Papers scattered across the elevator floor. Sarah dropped to her knees, mortified, grabbing at documents while trying to apologize. "I'm so sorry, I wasn't looking. She looked up. The man standing above her was tall, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than her monthly salary, and watching her scramble on the floor with an expression of complete detachment. Not annoyed, not amused, just blank, like she was mildly inconvenient scenery. He didn't move to help her. Sarah gathered the papers hastily, her face burning. "Sorry," she said again, standing up and clutching the disorganized stack to her chest. The elevator doors started to close. The man reached out and stopped them, but he did it mechanically, without looking at her. His attention was already on his phone. "Thank you," Sarah muttered. He didn't respond, just kept scrolling, his thumb moving across the screen with complete focus. Sarah pressed the button for the 9th floor and moved to the opposite corner of the elevator, trying to reorganize her folders while maintaining as much distance as possible. The elevator climbed. Sarah snuck glances at him from the corner of her eye. He had dark hair, perfectly cut, sharp features, the kind of face that looked expensive. His suit fit him like it had been made specifically for his body, because it probably had been. Everything about him radiated wealth and power and complete disinterest in anything happening around him. The elevator stopped at 9. Sarah stepped out quickly, relieved to escape. As the doors closed, she saw him still looking at his phone, completely unaware of her existence. "Rude," she muttered to herself. But she forgot about him almost immediately. She had work to do. On the 42nd floor, Alexander watched the elevator doors close and finally allowed himself to breathe. He'd been checking the building's security feeds for weeks, timing his movements to coincide with Sarah's schedule. He'd wanted to see her in person, wanted to observe her up close, to confirm that his quiet interventions were making a difference. The collision had been unplanned. She'd backed into him without warning, and for a split second, he'd frozen. She'd been close enough that he could smell her shampoo, something inexpensive and floral, close enough to see the dark circles under her eyes that makeup didn't quite hide, close enough to notice the small coffee stain on the cuff of her cardigan. He'd wanted to help her pick up the papers. The impulse had been strong and immediate, but helping would have meant engaging. Engaging would have meant she'd remember him. He needed to be forgettable, invisible, so he'd stood there and watched her scramble, projecting indifference while internally cataloging every detail. The way her hands shook slightly as she gathered the papers, the defensive hunch of her shoulders, the apology she'd given automatically, as if existing in his space required permission. Jeremy appeared in his office doorway. "The quarterly reports are ready for review. Send them to my personal email. I'll review them tonight. You have dinner with the Harrison Group in an hour. Cancel it." Jeremy didn't argue anymore. Over the past few weeks, Alexander had canceled dozens of dinners, meetings, social obligations. He was developing a reputation for being even more reclusive than usual. He didn't care. He pulled up the security feed from the 9th floor and watched Sarah return to her cubicle. She set down the folders, slumped in her chair, and pressed her fingers to her temples. The gesture of someone fighting a headache, someone who was tired but couldn't afford to stop. Alexander made a note in his phone. * comprehensive health benefits review. Include mental health coverage and wellness stipends. * small adjustments. Careful interventions. He was helping. She just didn't know it yet. Sarah saw him again 3 days later, in the building coffee shop on the 2nd floor. She normally didn't go there. The coffee was overpriced and the atmosphere was intimidating. All polished surfaces and people in expensive clothes conducting business meetings over $7 lattes. But her department was having a birthday celebration for someone, and she'd been volunteered to pick up the cake they'd ordered. She was standing at the pickup counter, waiting for the barista to retrieve her order, when she saw him sitting alone at a corner table. The rude man from the elevator. He had a laptop open in front of him, his attention completely focused on the screen. He held a cup of black coffee in one hand, brought it to his lips occasionally without looking away from his work. Everything about his posture communicated unavailability. Do not approach. Do not disturb. Sarah looked away quickly. She didn't want to be caught staring. But something about him nagged at her. The perfect suit, the expensive watch, the way he occupied space like he owned it. "Order for Chin?" the barista called. Sarah collected the cake box and headed for the exit. She had to pass relatively close to his table. As she did, he looked up. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. His expression didn't change. No recognition. No acknowledgement. Just a brief, disinterested glance before his attention returned to his laptop. Sarah felt a flash of irritation. She hadn't expected him to recognize her. Why would he? But something about his complete dismissal bothered her. As if she was furniture. As if she wasn't even worth the energy it took to process her existence. She pushed through the door and headed back to the elevator, telling herself it didn't matter. Rich people were like that. They moved through the world assuming everyone else would accommodate them. It wasn't personal, but it felt personal. That evening, riding the bus home, Sarah found herself thinking about him again. The careful blankness of his expression, the expensive suit, the complete self-containment. She wondered what it was like to move through the world with that kind of confidence. To never apologize, to never explain yourself, to simply exist and expect everyone else to adjust. It must be nice, she thought, and immediately felt guilty for the bitterness in that thought. The changes in Sarah's life continued. Her ancient laptop, which had been dying slowly for months, suddenly started working perfectly. She'd been planning to take it to a repair shop, but one morning she opened it and everything was faster, smoother. Files that used to take minutes to load now opened instantly. She ran a diagnostic and found nothing wrong. The system had somehow optimized itself. Her electricity bill dropped by 40%. The utility company credited it to a new efficiency program for low-income households. Sarah hadn't applied for any program, but she wasn't going to argue. She received a gift card in her mailbox, $200 to the grocery store she used. No note, no sender information. She called the store to ask if there had been some kind of promotion, but they had no record of how the card had been generated. She spent an hour trying to figure out where it came from before giving up and using it. Food appeared in her refrigerator. Not literally, she wasn't losing her mind, but her grocery money suddenly stretched further. The $50 she'd budgeted for the week somehow covered everything she needed plus a few small luxuries she hadn't had in months. Real coffee instead of instant. Fresh vegetables. A container of strawberries that felt like pure decadence. Sarah started to feel paranoid. She checked her bank account obsessively, looking for unauthorized charges. She reviewed her credit report for suspicious activity. She even called her mother, suspecting she'd somehow arranged these things. But her mother knew nothing. "You're just having good luck, honey," her mother said. "Don't overthink it." But Sarah couldn't stop overthinking it. The interventions were too targeted, too specific to her exact needs. Someone was watching. Someone knew things about her they shouldn't know. She considered going to HR. But what would she say? "I think someone is secretly improving my life. I'm concerned that my problems are being solved." She'd sound insane. So she said nothing. She accepted the help she didn't understand and tried not to think too hard about where it was coming from. The third time Sarah saw Alexander, she actually spoke to him. It was late on a Friday evening. She'd stayed past 7 to finish a report that absolutely had to be submitted by end of day. Everyone else had left. The office was empty and quiet. Just the hum of computers and the distant sound of a vacuum cleaner somewhere on another floor. She was finally done. She gathered her things, exhausted and hungry, and headed for the elevator. When the doors opened, he was already inside. The rude man. Again, they looked at each other. Sarah stepped inside, pressing herself against the opposite wall. The doors closed. The elevator began its descent. Silence stretched between them. Sarah stared at the floor numbers ticking down. She could feel him standing there, tall and still and completely comfortable with the silence. The elevator lurched. Sarah grabbed the handrail. The lights flickered once, then steadied. The number display froze between floors 8 and 7. "Oh no," Sarah said softly. She pressed the button for the 7th floor. Nothing happened. She pressed the emergency call button. A tinny voice answered after 3 rings. "Building security. Hi, we're stuck in elevator 3, between floors." "Copy that. Maintenance is on their way. Should be about 15 to 20 minutes. 20 minutes? Could be less. Sit tight." The line went dead. Sarah turned and looked at the man. He hadn't moved, hadn't reacted at all. He just stood there with his hands in his pockets, watching her with that same detached expression. Did you hear that? She asked. We're stuck? I heard. His voice was deep and even, completely unbothered. Sarah felt her irritation spike. You don't seem concerned. Maintenance is coming. What would concern accomplish? Sarah stared at him. Most people would at least pretend to be inconvenienced. I'm not most people. Clearly. She turned away from him, crossing her arms. 20 minutes trapped in an elevator with someone who apparently felt nothing. Perfect. Just perfect. She could hear him shifting behind her. The subtle sound of fabric moving. Then his voice again quieter. You work on 9. Sarah turned back, surprised. You noticed? I noticed things. But you don't help people pick up papers when they drop them. Was that amusement in his eyes? It was hard to tell. His expression remained neutral, but something shifted in the way he looked at her. Would you have preferred if I'd helped? Most people would have. You said that already. Most people. He tilted his head slightly. You seem bothered by the fact that I'm not most people. I'm bothered by the fact that you're rude. I'm efficient. That's just another word for rude when you use it as an excuse. Now, he definitely looked amused. The corner of his mouth moved slightly. Not quite a smile, but close. You're very direct. I've had a long day, Sarah said. I don't have energy for whatever this is. Whatever what is? This conversation where you pretend not to understand social expectations. He was quiet for a moment, studying her. Sarah felt exposed under that gaze. Like he was seeing something she didn't want seen. You're tired, he said finally. Excuse me. You're exhausted. You've been working too much. You look like you haven't slept properly in weeks. Sarah felt heat rising in her face. That's incredibly rude, but true. Just because something is true doesn't mean you should say it. Why not? Because she stopped, frustrated. Because people have feelings. Because words affect people. Because basic human decency requires at least pretending to care about how your honesty lands. He considered this. You prefer I lie? I prefer you just be less blunt. Noted. But he didn't sound like he was going to change anything. He just stood there, hands still in his pockets, watching her with that steady, unreadable gaze. The elevator gave another small lurch. Sarah grabbed the handrail again. He didn't move, didn't even blink. Does nothing bother you? She asked. Many things bother me. Like what? Inefficiency, dishonesty, people who waste time. That's a very short list. It covers most situations. Sarah laughed, despite herself. You're a piece of work. I've been called worse. They fell back into silence. But it was different now, less uncomfortable. Sarah found herself studying him from the corner of her eye. The perfect posture. The expensive watch that probably cost more than her car. The way he occupied space without apology. What do you do? She asked. In the building. What floor do you work on? 42. Sarah's eyebrows rose. The top floors. Venture capital. Something like that. So you're rich. Does that bother you? Should it? He smiled. Actually smiled. It transformed his entire face. Softened something that had seemed carved from stone. You tell me. You're the one who asked. I'm just trying to understand why someone rich enough to work on 42 takes the regular elevator instead of the executive one. The executive elevator was occupied by other executives. Sarah laughed again. He was impossible. Completely impossible. But something about sparring with him felt good. It required energy she didn't have. But it also woke something up inside her that had been sleeping for a long time. You're very strange, she said. So I've been told. I'm Sarah, by the way. He paused. Something flickered across his face, too quick to read. Alexander. Alexander. Okay. She held out her hand, mostly to see what he'd do. He looked at her hand for a moment, then reached out and shook it. His grip was firm but careful. His hand was warm. The contact lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then he released her and stepped back. Nice to meet you, Alexander, Sarah said, mostly because the silence felt like it needed filling. You too. The elevator lurched again, then smoothly resumed motion. The doors opened on the ground floor. They both stepped out. Sarah felt oddly reluctant to end the conversation, even though he'd been nothing but rude since the moment they'd gotten stuck. Well, she said, that was fun. Was it? I'm being sarcastic. I know. She shook her head. smiling despite herself. "You're exhausting." "So I've been told." He walked away without saying goodbye, just turned and headed for the exit, his stride confident and unhurried. Sarah watched him go, feeling confused and irritated and weirdly energized all at once. She'd just spent 20 minutes trapped in an elevator with possibly the rudest person she'd ever met. And for some reason, she couldn't stop thinking about the way he'd smiled. Alexander sat in his car and waited for Sarah to leave the building. He'd told Marcus, his driver, to take the evening off. He wanted to be alone, wanted to process what had just happened without anyone watching. He'd spoken to her, actually spoken to her, and worse, he'd enjoyed it. Her directness had caught him off guard. Most people were careful around him. They measured their words, watched their tone, tried to figure out what he wanted to hear. Sarah had just spoken, called him rude to his face, challenged him without fear. It had been refreshing. Dangerous, but refreshing. He watched her emerge from the building, pulling her cardigan tighter against the cold. She looked small and tired and determined. She walked the 6 blocks to her bus stop, and Alexander followed at a distance in his car, making sure she got there safely. This was becoming a problem. He'd started this as a simple project. Help someone who needed help. Make small adjustments from a distance. Feel useful in a way that didn't require board meetings and profit margins. But now she had a face, a voice, a personality that sparked against his in ways he hadn't expected. He watched her get on the bus, then drove back to his office. He needed to be more careful, more distant. The interventions could continue, but he couldn't afford to interact with her again. It complicated things. It made it personal in ways that could backfire. But even as he made these decisions, Alexander knew he was lying to himself. He wanted to see her again, wanted another conversation where she looked at him like he was just a person, not a position or a bank account. Wanted to hear her laugh again. That surprised sound she'd made when he'd said something particularly blunt. He pulled up her file on his laptop and stared at her employee photo. The careful, neutral expression, the exhaustion she tried to hide. "You're making this complicated," he said to the screen. The screen didn't answer. Sarah's life continued to improve in small, inexplicable ways. Her internet speed doubled. The provider said it was a service upgrade for her building, but her neighbor reported no such change. She received an email about a class action lawsuit she didn't remember joining. Apparently, she was eligible for a settlement. $347. She had no memory of the lawsuit, but she wasn't going to turn down money. Her old car, which had been making concerning noises for months, suddenly ran smoothly. She took it to her mechanic, expecting bad news, but he found nothing wrong. "Whatever was making that noise fixed itself," he said, looking confused. "I've never seen that happen." And then there was the coffee. Every morning there was coffee. Not in her apartment. She wasn't that paranoid yet, but at work. Someone had started a department coffee station with expensive beans and a real espresso machine. Linda from accounting claimed credit, but when Sarah asked her about it, Linda looked confused and said the machine had just appeared one day. "I figured HR bought it," Linda said. HR claimed they hadn't. The coffee was perfect, rich and dark, and exactly how Sarah liked it. She told herself it was just coincidence, that she wasn't developing a dependency on mysterious coffee that appeared from nowhere. But she thought about it more than she should, thought about all the small impossible things. The rent assistance, the education grant, the bus pass, the electricity bill, the laptop, the gift card, the coffee. Someone was helping her. Someone was watching her, and she had no idea who or why. Late at night, lying in her small apartment, Sarah would run through possibilities. A relative she didn't know about? A secret admirer? Some kind of charity organization? Corporate guilt from her employer? Nothing made sense. Nothing added up. She thought about going to the police. But what would she report? Someone is making my life better without my permission? They'd laugh her out of the station. So she accepted it, tried to be grateful, tried not to think about the fact that someone, somewhere, knew intimate details about her financial situation, about her needs, about her life. It should have felt invasive. It should have scared her. Instead, it felt like safety, like someone for the first time in years was watching out for her. She just wished she knew who. The 4th time Sarah saw Alexander, he was the one who initiated contact. She was in the building lobby, waiting for the elevator at the end of another long day. The space was mostly empty. Just her and a security guard reading something on his phone. The elevator dinged and the doors opened. Alexander was already inside. Sarah hesitated. She'd spent the past 2 weeks thinking about their elevator conversation. About how rude he'd been. About how much she'd enjoyed arguing with him anyway. About the way he'd smiled, rare and genuine. She told herself she didn't want to see him again. That he was exactly the kind of person she didn't have energy for. But when their eyes met, something sparked in her chest. She stepped inside. The doors closed. They stood in silence as the elevator began to climb. Sarah. She looked at him. Surprised, he remembered her name. Alexander. How have you been? The question was so normal, so unremarkable, that it caught her off guard. Fine. You. Fine. More silence. But it wasn't uncomfortable. Sarah found herself studying him again. The perfect suit. The careful posture. The way he looked at her, like he was seeing something specific. Are you following me? She asked suddenly. He raised an eyebrow. Why would you think that? Because every time I use this elevator, you're here. Coincidence. Is it? He turned to face her fully. Would it bother you if it wasn't? Sarah's heart did something strange. I don't know. Should it? That's not an answer. Neither was your response. The corner of his mouth moved. Almost a smile. You're very difficult. You want to talk. The elevator reached the 9th floor. The doors opened. Sarah didn't move. Neither did. Are you getting off? He asked. Are you being intentionally frustrating? Always. She laughed. Actually laughed. And saw something shift in his expression. A softening. Brief, but real. I have to go, she said, even though she didn't want to. Okay. But if you are following me, you should know that's creepy. Noted? She stepped off the elevator. Turned back to look at him. He was watching her with that steady, unreadable gaze. Why do you do that? She asked. Do what? Look at people like you're trying to figure them out. Maybe I am. Have you figured me out? Not even close. The doors started to close. Sarah caught them. Why? Why what? Why do you care about figuring me out? He was quiet for a long moment. Then, I don't know yet. The doors closed before she could respond. Sarah stood in the hallway, staring at the elevator, feeling like something important had just happened, but not understanding what. Inside the elevator, Alexander leaned against the wall and closed his eyes. He was losing control of this situation, getting too close, breaking his own rules. But when she'd asked why he cared, the only honest answer was, because she mattered. Because somewhere in the process of helping her from a distance, she'd become more than a project, more than someone to fix. She'd become someone he wanted to know. And that, Alexander realized, was going to be a problem. Because the closer he got, the harder it would be to hide what he'd been doing. And when she found out, because eventually she would find out, she would hate him for it. Sarah started paying more attention after that. She noticed patterns, times of day, when certain things happened. The appearance of coffee in the mornings. The way her technical issues resolved themselves. The small improvements that kept accumulating. She started documenting things. Made lists in her phone. Tried to find connections. The coffee appeared every morning at 7:30. Exactly 7:30. Someone was on a schedule. Her internet issues always resolved themselves within 24 hours of starting, as if someone was monitoring and fixing them remotely. The building maintenance that needed to happen in her apartment always got done faster than her neighbors' requests. When she mentioned this to the woman across the hall, the woman looked at her strangely and said, "You must have an in with management or something." Sarah didn't have an in with management. She'd barely spoken to anyone from the office. She thought about Alexander, about the way he'd asked if she thought he was following her, about his non-answer, about the fact that he worked on the 42nd floor, which meant he had money and resources and access to things she couldn't imagine. But it was impossible. Why would someone like him care about her? They'd had 2 conversations. He'd been rude both times. There was no reason for him to be interested in her, let alone actively improving her life. Unless Sarah pulled out her phone and opened a search engine. Alexander 42nd floor, venture capital. The results made her stomach drop. Alexander Moretti, founder and CEO of Moretti Capital. Net worth estimated at $4 billion. Known for being ruthless in business. Private to the point of reclusive. No social media presence. Rarely gave interviews. The handful of photographs showed the same man she'd been arguing with in elevators. For $1 billion. She'd called a billionaire rude to his face. Multiple times. Sarah put her phone away, feeling dizzy. This didn't make anything clearer. If anything, it made less sense. Why would Alexander Moretti, billionaire venture capitalist, care about her rent? About her student loans? About coffee appearing in her office? She was nobody. A junior administrator who made $38,000 a year and ate ramen for dinner. They existed in completely different universes. But the pieces were there. The timeline. The resources. The access. She just couldn't figure out why. The confrontation happened on a Tuesday. Sarah had been thinking about it all weekend, turning it over in her mind, building up the courage. She needed to know, even if it made her sound insane, even if she was completely wrong. She went to the 42nd floor. The elevator doors opened onto a space that looked nothing like her floor. Everything was glass and steel and expensive silence. A receptionist sat at a sleek desk, looking at Sarah with polite confusion. "Can I help you? I need to see Alexander Moretti." "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but Mr. Moretti doesn't see anyone without an appointment." Sarah had expected this. "Can you tell him Sarah Chun is here?" From the 9th floor. The receptionist looked skeptical but picked up her phone. Spoke quietly. Her expression shifted. Surprise, then uncertainty. She hung up. "He'll see you. Down the hall. Last door on the right." Sarah walked down the hallway, her heart pounding. This was insane. She was about to accuse a billionaire of secretly helping her. He'd probably have her escorted out by security. The door to his office was open. Alexander stood at the window, looking out at the city. He didn't turn when she entered. "Close the door," he said. She did. They stood in silence for a long moment. Sarah could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he gripped the edge of the window frame. "It's you," she said finally. "Isn't it? You'll need to be more specific. The rent assistance, the education grant, the bus pass, the coffee, my laptop, my electricity bill, the gift card, all of it. It's you." He turned. His expression was completely neutral. "That's quite an accusation." "It's not an accusation. It's a fact. I know it's you." "How?" "Because nothing else makes sense. Because the timing lines up. Because—" She stopped, searching for the right words. "Because you're the only person who would have the resources to do all of this. And because you asked if I thought you were following me. You already knew." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he walked to his desk and sat on the edge of it, crossing his arms. "Why would I do any of that? That's what I'm here to find out. Maybe you're wrong. Maybe you're paranoid and looking for patterns that aren't there." "Am I?" He looked at her steadily. "What do you want me to say?" "The truth. The truth is complicated. Try me." Alexander was quiet for so long Sarah thought he might not answer. Then he sighed and ran a hand through his hair, the first truly unguarded gesture she'd seen from him. "I overheard you," he said. "That day you told Marcus from IT about your fake boyfriend. I was leaving my office. The conversation drifted through the door. You were tired and desperate and lying because it was easier than dealing with one more thing." Sarah felt her face flush. "You heard that?" "I heard that. And I thought—" He trailed off, looking away. "I thought it was unfair. That you had to lie. That you were working full-time and struggling to pay rent. That you were invisible to everyone who should have noticed you were drowning. So you decided to fix it. I decided to help. Without asking me. Without telling me. You just invaded my privacy and started rearranging my life." "Yes." The blunt admission caught her off guard. "You're not even going to defend yourself. What would be the point?" "You're right. I invaded your privacy. I made decisions about your life without your consent. I've been watching you for weeks, making sure the interventions were working." He met her eyes. "I won't apologize for any of it." "Why not?" "Because you needed help, and I could provide it. The end result is the same regardless of how you feel about my methods." Sarah felt anger rising in her chest. "The end result is not the same. You took away my agency. You made me feel crazy, questioning where all this help was coming from. You. She stopped, breathing hard. You made me feel like I was losing my mind. Something flickered in his expression. That wasn't my intention. Then what was your intention? To help you. That's all. I saw someone struggling and I had the ability to fix it. People aren't problems to be fixed, Alexander. I know that. Do you? Because from where I'm standing, you treated me like a project, like something broken you could repair from a distance and feel good about yourself. He stood up, and Sarah saw real emotion cross his face for the first time. That's not what this was. Then what was it? I don't know. He looked frustrated, uncertain. I don't know. I saw you struggling, and I thought I could help. Quietly, without complicating things, without you having to feel indebted or grateful. I thought I was doing the right thing. You thought you were doing the right thing. You didn't ask me what I wanted, what I needed. You just decided. Would you have accepted help if I'd asked? I don't know, but I deserved the chance to decide. They stared at each other. Sarah could see him struggling with something, some internal conflict she didn't understand. You were right, he said finally. You deserved that choice. I took away from you. That was wrong. The admission deflated some of her anger. Why? Why what? Why did you do any of this? Why did you care? You don't know me. We'd never even spoken until the elevator. Why would you risk this much, your privacy, your reputation, potentially legal consequences, just to help some random woman you overheard in the hallway? Alexander was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was soft. Because you reminded me that people can be invisible even when they're right in front of you. Because I spend my days moving money around and making deals that affect companies I'll never set foot in. Because I have more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes, and I wanted to do something that mattered to an actual person. He paused. Because when I saw your employee photo, I saw someone who'd given up on expecting kindness. And I thought maybe I could change that. Sarah felt tears prickling at her eyes. That's incredibly arrogant. I know. And invasive. I know. And you still think you did the right thing. I think I did the thing I needed to do. He took a step toward her. I'm not going to apologize for helping you, Sarah. But I will apologize for not telling you, for making you feel crazy, for taking away your choice. She wiped at her eyes, frustrated with herself for crying. This is so messed up. Yes. I should be furious with you. You should be. But I'm not. Not completely. She laughed, the sound coming out wet and broken. That's the worst part. I should hate you for this. But all I can think about is that you're the first person in years who actually saw me, who noticed I was drowning. Alexander moved closer. I see you. I know. That's what scares me. They stood there, the space between them charged with something Sarah didn't have words for. He was too close. Not close enough. She could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, could see the tension in his jaw. What happens now? She asked quietly. That's up to you. I don't know what I want. Then take time to figure it out. Sarah nodded. She should leave. She should walk out of this office and never look back. But her feet wouldn't move. The coffee, she said. The coffee every morning. That was you. That was me. I've become dependent on that coffee. I noticed. That's manipulation. That's caffeine addiction. She laughed despite everything. You're impossible. So you said. Sarah looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something she hadn't expected. Vulnerability, uncertainty. This man who moved through the world with such confidence was standing here, waiting for her judgment. And he looked almost afraid. I need time, she said finally. Take all the time you need. And you need to stop. The interventions, the helping, all of it. If I need something, I'll ask. Okay. I mean it, Alexander. No more secret assistance. No more mysterious coincidences. If you want to help me, you ask first. Understood. She turned to leave, then stopped at the door. Why did you smile? In the elevator that day, when I laughed. Why did you smile? He was quiet for a moment. Because it was the first real thing that had happened to me in months. Sarah left without responding. Because if she stayed, if she let herself think too hard about what he'd just said, she'd do something stupid. Like forgive him completely. Like forget that what he'd done was wrong, even if it came from a good place. Like admit that despite everything, she wanted to see him again. The elevator ride down felt longer than it should have. Sarah leaned against the wall and tried to process what had just happened. Alexander Moretti, billionaire, recluse, The man who'd been secretly improving her life for weeks. The man who'd looked at her like she mattered. The man who'd seen her when everyone else looked through her. She was in so much trouble. Alexander stood at his window and watched Sarah leave the building. He'd told her the truth. Not all of it, not the part about how thinking about her had become the first thing he did in the morning and the last thing he did at night. But enough. Enough that she could make an informed decision about what happened next. She'd asked him to stop, and he would, because she'd asked. But stopping meant stepping back, meant watching her struggle without helping, meant accepting that some problems couldn't be solved with money and careful interventions. His phone buzzed. Jeremy, with the afternoon schedule. Alexander ignored it. He'd spent years building walls between himself and the world, keeping people at a distance, staying focused on work, on deals, on measurable outcomes. It had been safe, uncomplicated. Sarah had complicated everything. She'd walked into his office and called him arrogant and invasive and impossible. She cried and then laughed and then demanded honesty. She'd seen through every defense he'd carefully constructed. And instead of feeling exposed, he'd felt relief. Someone finally saw him. Not his money, not his position, not the carefully curated public image. Just him, Alexander, the person who'd heard a woman lying about having a boyfriend and thought maybe he could fix that. He pulled out his phone and deleted the monitoring software he'd installed on the building systems, removed the alerts that told him when Sarah entered or left the building, canceled the standing orders that had been generating the small improvements in her life. It felt like losing something, but she'd asked, and he respected her enough to stop. His intercom buzzed. Mr. Moretti, you have the board meeting in 15 minutes. Cancel it. Sir, this is the quarterly. Cancel it, Jeremy. Tell them I'm dealing with something personal. Silence. Then yes, sir. Alexander turned away from a window. He had work to do. Actual work. The kind that had filled his days before Sarah Chun had backed into him in an elevator and called him rude. But for the first time in years, the work felt hollow. Sarah didn't see Alexander for 2 weeks. She should have been relieved. She'd asked for space and he'd given it to her. No more mysterious appearances. No more pointed coincidences. No more help that appeared from nowhere. Instead, she felt his absence everywhere. The coffee station stayed, but it felt different now that she knew who'd put it there. The rent came due and she paid it herself, the full amount, without any mysterious adjustments. Her laptop stayed fixed, but there were no new improvements. Everything was normal. She hated it. She hated that normal felt like going backward. She hated that she'd gotten used to small miracles. She hated that she missed arguing with a man who'd invaded her privacy and thought he knew what was best for her. Most of all, she hated that she understood why he'd done it. Late at night, replaying their conversation, she kept coming back to one thing. Because when I saw your employee photo, I saw someone who'd given up on expecting kindness. He'd seen her, actually seen her, and instead of looking away, instead of assuming someone else would help, he decided to do something about it. It was wrong. It was invasive. It was manipulative. It was also the kindest thing anyone had done for her in years. Sarah sat in her apartment, eating ramen that now felt like a choice rather than a necessity, and tried to figure out what she wanted. She could leave it alone, avoid him, let the whole thing fade into a strange story she'd tell someday about the time a billionaire had secretly helped her. Or she could seek him out, try to understand him, try to figure out if what she felt was gratitude or something more complicated. Her phone buzzed. A text from Linda. Asterisk drinks after work tomorrow? We need to catch up? Asterisk. Sarah stared at the message. Catching up meant Linda would ask about her fake boyfriend, the lie she'd told that had started all of this. She typed back, asterisk can't tomorrow. Rain check? Asterisk. She'd been avoiding that conversation for weeks. Eventually, she'd have to either introduce people to her imaginary boyfriend or admit she'd lied. Either option felt impossible, unless Sarah picked up her phone and stared at it for 5 full minutes before opening a new message. Asterisk, this is Sarah Chun from the 9th floor. I don't have your number, so I'm sending this to the executive assistant directory and hoping it reaches you. We should talk in person, not in your office, somewhere neutral. If you're interested, let me know when and where, asterisk. She sent it before she could change her mind. 3 minutes later, Her phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? Coffee shop. Second floor. Tomorrow at 7:30 in the morning. Alexander's voice, steady and familiar. If that doesn't work, tell me when does. That works. Okay. Silence. Sarah could hear him breathing on the other end of the line. Neither of them hung up. Sarah. Yeah. Thank you for reaching out. Don't make me regret it. I'll try not to. He hung up. Sarah stared at her phone, her heart racing. She just asked Alexander Moretti out for coffee. Not out, just out, neutrally, to talk. She was definitely going to regret this. But as she lay in bed that night, unable to sleep, Sarah realized she didn't care. For the first time in years, something felt like it might be starting instead of ending. And that was worth whatever came next. Alexander arrived at the coffee shop at 7:15. Too early. He knew he was too early, but he couldn't help himself. He ordered black coffee and sat at the corner table, the same table where Sarah had seen him weeks ago, and waited. He'd spent the past 2 weeks respecting her request for space. It had been harder than he'd expected, breaking a habit of monitoring her life, resisting the urge to solve problems he saw forming, letting her exist without his interference. But she'd reached out. She'd chosen to see him again. That had to mean something. He saw her enter at exactly 7:30. She spotted him immediately and hesitated. For a moment he thought she might turn around and leave. Then she squared her shoulders and walked over. Hi, she said. Hi. She sat down across from him. No coffee. Just her hands clasped on the table, slightly nervous. I've been thinking, she said. About what you said. About seeing me. About wanting to help. She took a breath. I've been angry about it. For 2 weeks I've been telling myself I should stay angry, that what you did was wrong and I should cut contact and move on. But I can't stop thinking about the fact that you're the only person who noticed I was drowning. Everyone else just walked past. My coworkers, my friends, my family. Everyone was so busy with their own lives that no one saw me. She met his eyes. Except you. Alexander felt something tight in his chest loosen. I saw it. I know, and that matters more than I wanted to. What are you saying? I'm saying I don't know what this is. This thing, between us. But I want to figure it out. Without lies. Without you secretly controlling things from the shadows. If we're going to do this, whatever this is, it needs to be honest. Agreed. I mean it, Alexander. No more interventions. No more fixing things without asking. If I have a problem, I'll tell you. And if you want to help, you ask first. I understand. She studied him for a long moment. Do you? Because I'm not sure you know how to not fix things. It seems like it's your default setting. You're right. It is. But I can learn. He leaned forward slightly. For you, I can learn. Sarah's expression softened. That's a big promise. I don't make promises I can't keep. Okay. She exhaled slowly. Okay. So what now? Now, we start over. Properly, this time. He held out his hand. I'm Alexander Moretti. I work on the 42nd floor. I'm bad at small talk and worse at understanding social cues. I'm direct to the point of rudeness, and I have a tendency to try to solve problems without asking if people want them solved. Sarah took his hand. I'm Sarachan. I work on the 9th floor. I'm tired most of the time, and I eat too much ramen. I'm suspicious of help because I've learned not to expect it. And I told a lie about having a boyfriend because it was easier than dealing with reality. They shook hands. This time, neither of them let go immediately. There's something you should know, Alexander said quietly. What? The fake boyfriend you invented. The one you told Marcus about. He paused. I've been thinking about that. About why hearing that bothered me so much. About why I felt compelled to step in. Sarah's heart started beating faster. And I think part of me wanted to be that person. The one who protected you. Who made your life easier. Who was there even when you didn't know it. He looked down at their joined hands. I think I wanted to be real. The words hung between them. Sarah felt tears pricking at her eyes again. Alexander, I'm not asking you for anything, he said quickly. I'm just being honest. Like you asked. She tried to find words. That's probably the most vulnerable thing you've ever said to anyone. Probably. Are you scared I'm going to run? Terrified. She squeezed his hand. I'm not running. No. No, because, she took a breath, because somewhere in the past 2 weeks of being angry at you, I realized I missed you. Not the help, not the miraculous solutions. Just you, the rude, impossible, too direct version of you that I met in an elevator. Alexander smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his face. So where does that leave us? I have no idea, Sarah admitted, but I think I want to find out. They sat there, hands still clasped, and for the first time since this whole thing started, Sarah felt like they were on equal footing. No secrets, no hidden help, just two people who'd found each other in the most unlikely way and were trying to figure out what came next. It wasn't a resolution. It wasn't an ending. It was barely even a beginning, but it was honest. And for Sarah, that was enough. For now. Outside the coffee shop, the city moved through its morning routine. People rushing to work, traffic building, the sun climbing higher in an October sky that promised cold weather ahead. Inside, Alexander and Sarah sat at a corner table and talked, really talked, about work and life and the strange circumstances that had brought them together, about loneliness and visibility and what it meant to be seen. Sarah learned that Alexander had built his company from nothing, that he'd been poor once long ago and remembered what it felt like to choose between rent and food, that he'd spent years building walls between himself and everyone else because it was easier than risking connection. Alexander learned that Sarah had moved to the city with big dreams and smaller bank account, that she sent money home whenever she could, even when she couldn't afford it, that she'd learned to be small and quiet because taking up space felt dangerous. They talked until the coffee shop started filling with the morning rush, until Sarah realized she was going to be late for work and Alexander realized he'd missed 2 meetings. We should go, Sarah said, reluctantly. We should. Neither of them moved. I want to see you again, Alexander said. Properly. Dinner. Conversation. No elevators or coincidental meetings. That sounds like a date. It would be a date. Sarah felt her heart flutter. Okay. Yes. Dinner. Conversation. A real date with my no longer imaginary boyfriend. Alexander laughed, actually laughed, and Sarah realized it was the first time she'd heard the sound. It was warm and genuine and made something in her chest feel light. Tomorrow, he asked. Tomorrow. They stood. Alexander hesitated, then stepped closer and pulled her into a hug. It was careful, tentative, the embrace of someone who wasn't used to physical affection but was willing to try. Sarah sank into it. He was warm and solid, and he smelled like expensive cologne and coffee. She felt safe in a way she hadn't felt in years. When they pulled apart, Alexander cupped her face gently. Thank you. For what? For giving me a chance. For seeing past the things I did wrong to what I was trying to do right. Thank you for seeing me. He kissed her forehead. Soft. Brief. Then he stepped back, his hand lingering on her cheek for just a moment longer. Tomorrow, he said. Tomorrow. Sarah watched him leave the coffee shop, watched him disappear into the morning crowd, and felt the strangest sensation of certainty. This wasn't the ending of their story. It was barely even the middle, but it was theirs. Complicated and messy and honest and real. And that was everything.